Time by Raymond Vale, 10:30 p.m.
Post-Cold War issues, peacekeeping ranks high on the list. Taking the arts to new lands. And bringing stocks and shares down to basics.
Good evening. The Foreign Minister says the changing face of UN peacekeeping operations is one of the most important issues facing the United Nations.
And the United States and Japan are still far from reaching a trade agreement.
The two most important issues facing the United Nations after the Cold War are the changes to peacekeeping operations and the rising cost of financing them. Foreign Minister Professor Jayakumar outlined these points in his speech today to the 49th session of the United Nations General Assembly. In his address, Professor Jayakumar said the UN now faces more challenges, and without payments, the UN just cannot function. He suggested charging interest on late payments by member states and the principle that the permanent members of the Security Council with their privileged positions should not be in arrears. Professor Jayakumar said one of the most heated arguments in the years ahead for the UN would be how much money member states should pay for peacekeeping operations, and Singapore is ready to help.
Singapore will strive, together with other member states, to work out objective political and economic criteria to improve the scale. There must be a process of debate and discussion, however protracted it may be, before we can arrive at a consensus on a new scale. Singapore, on its part, is ready to pay more to peacekeeping expenses, provided, firstly, that this is the outcome of an overall reform of the peacekeeping scale, and secondly, that the problem of those who are in arrears is seriously addressed.
Professor Jayakumar said once a peacekeeping operation has been started, member states cannot allow it to fail because of a lack of resources. Another challenge facing the UN are conflict situations that have changed from being between states to those that are within the state, such as Haiti, Rwanda and Bosnia. Professor Jayakumar said that because UN involvement could be intrusive, guidelines and criteria need to be worked out to decide where UN involvement will be necessary and when it will be effective.
US-Japan trade talks are continuing in Washington with hopes for a partial deal that will prevent the US from imposing sanctions since the deadline for the deal has passed. US Trade Representative Miki Kanter met throughout the night with Japanese Trade Minister Ryotaro Hashimoto. After their meeting, a Japanese official said many problems remained, but US Treasury Secretary Lloyd Bentsen has hinted that there has been some headway, with both sides making more effort at negotiations. What is being called the finale of the 14 months of intensive negotiations has seen the United States negotiator also meeting Japan's Foreign Minister Yohei Kono in the hope of a deal. Although Japan is hoping for some progress, the government is bracing itself for sanctions from the United States. The latest round of talks have focused on US access to the Japanese car and glass market.
In India, the number of suspected plague cases in the capital, New Delhi, is possibly between 200 and 250. And India has begun screening all departing air passengers and fumigating planes in a bid to convince foreign governments it won't spread the plague around the world. The move comes as some airport workers play it safe.
Passengers on Air India's flight from London to Toronto had no idea of the reception they'd receive upon arrival in Canada. This is how some Toronto airport employees greeted the plane because of India's pneumonic plague. A dozen Air Canada ground workers and passenger agents refused to work the plane after a briefing on the medical risks. Airline officials say there's little reason to worry because passengers and planes at London's Heathrow Airport were sprayed with chemicals to kill plague-carrying fleas. British health officials have tested 9 recent arrivals from India who suffered flu-like symptoms. 8 tested negative for the plague. The 9th is still undergoing tests.
And the Labour Ministry says it supports the move by the Plague Task Force to ban Indian workers from entering Singapore until further notice. But the ministry will help affected employers.
Some employers are stuck because they need Indian workers to replace others who are due to be sent back. But the ministry said it's willing to help them get replacements. Also, it said work permits of existing workers may be extended for a limited period if needed. When asked how the ministry plans to enforce the ban, it said no new work permits will be issued to Indian workers, and applications already submitted will be put on hold. Employers have been advised to hire foreign workers from other sources. The task force has said Indian workers who've arrived just before the ban will not be sent back. So far, there are no indications if Indian tourists will be stopped as well.
All points of entry continue to be checked for the plague today. Since the Environment Ministry and the Port of Singapore Authority stepped up control measures on Wednesday, more than 10 ships coming from India have been inspected. All have been cleared for entry into Singapore. News 5 followed an inspection team on their rounds this morning. On their hit list, rat droppings, gnawing marks, holes and damage of any sort. These indicate rat infestation and the likelihood of the dreaded plague. They're also on the lookout for plague symptoms among the crew. All ships coming from India will have to remain in the quarantine anchorage, some 20 kilometers out at sea, until cleared by port health officers. Once berthed at port, rat guards are required on mooring ropes to prevent any rats climbing down to shore. The necessary checks have resulted in some delays for the ships.
Sometimes it's inconvenient, but we have to comply with international rules and to respect the terms and the law of each one place.
The haze is still at an unhealthy level today. The Environment Ministry says it registered 108 points on the Pollutant Standards Index. The reading is for the 24-hour period up to 9 p.m. Permanent Secretary of the Environment Ministry, Tan Guong Ching, will be in Penang on Thursday to attend a meeting of the Malaysia-Singapore Joint Committee on the Environment. The two-day meeting will discuss the haze problems currently faced by the region. It will also look into other issues like control of smoke and noise emissions from vehicles, water quality in the Straits of Johor, and management of wastes and toxic chemicals. The committee was formed in 1991 to foster closer cooperation on environmental matters between the two countries.
Singapore International Media, or SIM, this replaces the Singapore Broadcasting Corporation from today. CEOs of the 3 of the 4 companies under SIM told News 5 the directions their companies will be taking.
Staying focused and responding to their audience's tastes to give them top-quality radio and television programs, a mission echoed by CEOs of the 3 subsidiary companies. Television Corporation Singapore, which owns and manages channels 5 and 8, will focus its efforts on producing top-quality programs.
The challenge for us is to maintain our key position as anchor channels for Singaporeans. To do that, we will improve our local programming to make them more entertaining as well as relevant to the lives of our viewers in Singapore.
Channel 5's prime time will be filled with more local shows like the first English drama series, Masters of the Sea, and a local sitcom next year. And for Channel 8 viewers, a Mandarin business program by the end of the year, and a Mandarin breakfast show next March. TCS is also looking outwards to sell its own productions.
We are looking at launching a commercial satellite channel which will most likely be encrypted and marketed in specific countries in East Asia.
Television 12, a public service broadcaster, will provide special programs to niche audiences.
There will be more primetime hours for minority language programs. We hope to increase the quantity of local Malay productions by encouraging producers out there to produce programs for the company. At the same time, in the long run, we hope to establish our own production capabilities.
Also in the pipeline, a second channel to be owned by TV12. And staying relevant to viewers, TV12 will be seeking feedback on their program preferences for the second channel next month. For Radio Corporation Singapore, holding on its position as Singapore's leading radio broadcaster is its priority.
We believe that we are strongly positioned to maintain and even grow slightly our share of the market. We already have more than 90% of the listenership for radio in Singapore. And we attribute that to our ability to stay focused on the needs of the listeners of each station.
Still to come, making the arts in Singapore known overseas.
The travel grant scheme by the NAC is taking our artists places. The story after the break. Singapore, along with 8 other Asian states, have signed a deal to build a fiber optic cable network. The Asia-Pacific Cable Network will cost $524 million. The undersea cable will link Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, Hong Kong, Thailand, the Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia and Singapore. It's capable of handling more than 786,000 telephone calls at the same time. The project is due for completion in November 1996 and could be integrated with another fiber optic cable built by Australia.
Free tickets to help arts groups perform overseas. The National Arts Council says its SIA-NAC travel grant scheme launched in April has had good response.
A romantic moment for one arts group which represented Singapore at a theatre festival in Cairo last month with the play Ti Tou Dao, or A Fallen Angel.
Going overseas is an important way to upgrade an artist. Singapore is a very small place and there are always very limited things that you can really project on or think of or inspire you to do more things.
The trip cost more than $30,000. $23,000 came from the NAC. So far, some 20 arts groups have benefited from the travel grants. NAC's travel grant budget more than tripled in April to $350,000 when Singapore Airlines committed $250,000 worth of air tickets. SIA says it has no plans to change its annual contribution, while the NAC says it's now able to give more assistance for even bigger productions. Another organization supplementing NAC's efforts is the SIF.
The impression that others have of us as Singaporeans is that we are very pragmatic and very efficient society. The SIF's mandate is to assist in internationalizing Singapore, but from a very humanitarian and cultural point of view. This will help to soften Singapore's image abroad.
More than 3,000 people turned students for a day to find out more about something that is close to the hearts and pockets of most Singaporeans. They took part in talks held in conjunction with the SES Investment Fair.
One such talk focused on unit trust, a topic that has raised interest thanks to the recent relaxing of CPF rules.
There is a tendency that people tend to confuse unit trust with stock and shares. And while we're really talking about the stock market at the end of the day, unit trust and stocks and shares are actually two different animals. We would like to emphasize today that unit trusts are actually savings vehicles for you for the long term.
And those who came were not disappointed.
I find the talk informative. At least now I know how the unit trusts work, especially for people who have no time to manage funds on their own.
He really explained what unit trust is all about. It's about, get all the funds from public and then use them to invest, invested by professional.
Some also made use of the weekend to open central depository accounts at the fair. In all, the exchange has received over 200 applications, and by 4 p.m. today, turnout had surpassed yesterday's figure of 11,000 to 14,000. SES says it's still waiting for the response tomorrow before deciding whether to make the fair an annual event. The Singapore Anti-Narcotics Association, or SANA, has been urged to upgrade its aftercare counselling program and reach out to more ex-addicts. Home Affairs Minister Wong Kan Seng says SANA should also explore ways of recruiting and retaining more volunteer aftercare officers, or VAOs. Speaking at the SANA VAO night, he said where possible, the VAOs could start counselling inmates of drug rehabilitation centres just before their release and then follow up with aftercare counselling. Mr. Goh said the government had recently reviewed the drug situation in Singapore and had come up with recommendations for enforcement, rehabilitation and public education. This will be presented at the National Drug Seminar tomorrow. Mr. Wong later presented the Sana Awards of Honour to volunteer aftercare officers and groups who've helped the association further its aims for at least 3 years.
Finance Minister Dr. Richard Hu will be in Madrid next week to attend this year's joint annual meetings of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. While in Madrid, he'll also be meeting government officials and bankers. Dr. Hu leaves tonight, will be accompanied by senior officials from the Finance Ministry and the Monetary Authority of Singapore.
The number of trained staff in childcare centres has gone up more than fourfold since 1988. The Acting Minister for Community Development said out of a total of 1,300 childcare staff in 1988, 560 were trained. Today, the number of trained staff has increased to 2,500 out of a total of 3,300.
Mr. Abdullah said this at the official opening of Jamia's first childcare centre in Ang Mo Kio today. He also stressed the need to continue to train as many childcare staff as possible.
Better trained staff benefit everyone. The children will receive better education and care, and parents will feel assured that their children are in good hands. The reputation of the childcare centre will improve, and the staff will feel better motivated and more committed.
The centre runs its programs in 3 languages, English, Malay and Mandarin. There are 7 Chinese children among the first batch of 70.
And sports news is next, right after the break.
What have you got for us, babe?
Well, there's some local soccer, so after the break, we'll bring you highlights of the FAS Premier League match between Changi and Balestier United. The Asian Games in Hiroshima kick off tomorrow. Our reporter Terence Lau, who's there, looks at how our local athletes are getting on and what to expect at the grand opening. The bulk of the Singapore contingent arrived in Hiroshima on Wednesday. The 148-strong contingent has 88 competing athletes. There will be 337 gold medals at stake in a record 34 sports, and the Republic will be represented in 17 of them. After 2 days of settling in, the Singapore contingent was officially welcomed at the flag-raising ceremony yesterday. The athletes' village mayor himself, Mr. Masayuki Sano, was there to welcome the Singapore team, just one of over 40 countries taking part in the Games. Assistant Chef de Mission Colonel Kwan Yu Yong headed the Singapore team at the ceremony, but all the smiles will be left behind when the competition proper begins on Monday. In all, over 30 sports will be taking place in 43 venues. Most will be within the city of Hiroshima, with the rest in the prefectures of Hiroshima and Yamaguchi.
And just behind me is the main stadium at Hiroshima Regional Park. The park covers almost 60 hectares, with separate stadiums for soccer and hockey. It's pretty quiet right now, but come tomorrow, some 50,000 people will fill this stadium to witness the opening ceremony of the Asian Games.
It's easy to see why the Japanese called it the Hiroshima Big Arch. This magnificent stadium will be the main venue for athletics and soccer. Arriving at the athletes' village today was the Asian Games Flame. The torch left Beijing on September 7th for Tokyo, visiting 17 prefectures before reaching Hiroshima. Within the Hiroshima prefecture alone, the torch passed through over 80 cities, towns and villages. Over 3,400 volunteer runners covered approximately 470 kilometers in the torch relay. And tomorrow it'll make its way to the opening ceremony, signaling the start of the 12th Asian Games. The preliminary round of the Asian Games soccer competition began today with the favourites South Korea scoring a record 11-0 win over Nepal. 8 of the goals were scored by World Cup star Hwang San-hong. In other matches, Turkmenistan pulled off a 2-2 draw against China. Saudi Arabia lost to Uzbekistan 4-0. Malaysia edged out Hong Kong 4-3, while Kuwait and Oman played to a 2-2 draw. Over at the Jalan Bazaar Stadium, Balestier United retained their place in the FAS Premier League with their 4-1 win over Changi United. Balestier in the yellow shirts consolidated their first round 5-1 win by taking a 1-0 half-time lead through Isad Sejic. After the interval, Cedric scored 3 more goals, the second after he beat the offside trap, and the third from the penalty spot. Changi's consolation goal was scored by Peter de Cruz. But Cedric wrapped up the match with Ballestier's 4th goal. Judging by their 9-2 aggregate loss, Changi are simply not ready for the Premier League.
Still on soccer, the South American Super Cup competition. Defending champions Sao Paulo of Brazil drew 1-1 against Nacional of Colombia to advance to the second round.
Sao Paulo in white was shocked when they chalked up a penalty in the first minute following a blunder by central defender Junior Baiano. Mauricio Serna converted the penalty for Nacional, scoring the first goal of the match. But Sao Paulo equalized in the 79th minute through midfielder Paulina to qualify on a 3-1 aggregate. In another first-round match, away team Colo-Colo of Chile drew 1-1 with the Argentinos juniors in red shirts. They advanced to the second round on a 4-2 aggregate advantage. Trailing 3-1 from the first leg, Juan Comas put the Argentinian side back in contention with a goal in the 40th minute. But Marcelo Vega restored Colo-Colo's 2-goal advantage 7 minutes into the second half.
The men's volleyball championships in Greece. The Netherlands maintained their perfect start with a 3-1 victory over South Korea in a Group D game in Salonika. South Korea in red put up a tough fight but were eventually well beaten 15-7, 13-15, 15-8, 15-6. The Dutch had begun their challenge with a 3-1 win over Sweden the previous day. In other matches, Russia fought a 2.5-hour battle to defeat Canada 3-2 in Group A, while in Group B, Germany beat Argentina 3-0. China also beat Japan 3-0, but that was in a Group C match. The European Sand Sailing Championships. Lack of wind forced the cancellation of all but 1 day of racing along the Belgian coast. And a surprise for all, America's only entrant is the top qualifier in the men's section of Class 3.
Despite a strong showing by teams from Belgium and Germany, the Class 3 prize was scooped by the sole American entrant Jean Krischer, who had a 5-point total. In second place was Egon Plovier from Belgium with 10 points, and in third his teammates Xavier Wickmans, Jan Ley and German Hans Ikstad, all with 13 points. In the women's class, France's Anne Lefebvre and Britain's Paula Lea took the honours with 3 points each, and Nathalie Devine completed a good day for France, coming in behind the leaders with 7 points.
That's the sports news for tonight. It's back to Duncan for the weather.
And finally, tomorrow's weather. It'll be hazy with showers over several areas in the afternoon. The temperature range 25 to 32 degrees. In ASEAN, fair in Jakarta. In Northeast Asia, cloudy and rain in Tokyo. And that's the news tonight. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.